So depth of field is basically the amount of the image that is in focus. Basically how much of the image is in focus. So for example, a shallow depth of field would mean a very thin plane is in focus. So basically when a little bit is in focus, the foreground and the background will be thrown out of focus. And a deep depth of field would mean a lot is in focus, so the focus is very deep. So shallow depth of field basically is what normal people know as the background blur effect. Hence, shallow depth of field is good for portraits. And the background blur is also known as bokeh, originating from a Japanese word meaning blur. Now, there are a few factors that affect the depth of field of an image. Now, the first most important factor is aperture. So the wider the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. So a narrow aperture will also give you a very deep depth of field. So that means lenses with a wide aperture such as a 1.2, 1.4 or 1.8 lens are very good for portraits since they give you very strong and good bokeh. Now apart from that, the second factor is focal length. Now we've discussed focal length in the previous video. So basically the longer the focal length, the shallower the depth of field. So for example, an 85mm lens would produce a much shallower depth of field than a 35mm lens at a similar aperture value. Now another factor is your distance to the subject. So when you get close to your subject, you can actually focus in closer, thus throwing the background further out of focus. Now there is some debate going on whether sensor size affects depth of field or not. Now, the answer is yes and no, because for example, a 35mm full-frame sensor can produce shallower depth of field than APS-C sensors. So basically what happens is, when you're on a 35mm full-frame sensor, you can actually move in closer to your subject, or you can change to a lens with a longer focal length to keep the same framing as the same image on an APS-C size sensor. So the shallower depth of field caused by so-called sensor size actually corresponds to the second and third factor of depth of field, and that is focal length and distance to subject.